One day, a ship from east came to an Italian port and the world changed. The plague, also known as the Black Death or the Great Pestilence, originated in China. Though it is not certain, it traveled west through trade routes all the way to the Middle East, ravaging every country on its way.
It was such a vicious killer that the relatively earlier victims, the Saracens, thought it was God's way of punishing them for their abominable beliefs. They were so desperate to survive, a considerable amount of them turned Christian so God would spare them. But plague did not care. It did not care whether you were Muslim, Christian. It killed regardless of faith, regardless of nation, regardless of gender.
So plague continued its voyage through Middle East to the Europe. Italians were the first but not the last Western European nation to fall victim. From Italy, disease spread in France and finally in England. It is not definite exactly where the plague showed its ugly head first in English soil. Some resources claim it was Bristol and some others claim it was Dorset which was first infected. But there is a consensus that it arrived in the west coast of England in the summer of 1348 through ships from France, particularly from Gascony, which was under English control.
The plague presented itself in different ways. The most common type of plague was the bubonic plague. Giovanni Boccaccio, author of the Decameron, describes it like this.
It began both in man and woman, with certain swellings in the groin or under the armpit. They grew to the size of a small apple or an egg, more or less, and were vulgarly called tumors. In a short space of time, these tumors spread from the two parts named all over the body. Soon after this, the symptoms changed and the black or purple spots appeared on the arms or thighs or any other part of the body. Sometimes as a few large ones, sometimes many little ones.
Bubonic plague also had symptoms such as fever, headache, vomiting and muscle pain, but they were not as spectacular as the swellings Boccaccio describes. These swellings are also called buboes, which gives the bubonic plague its name. Bubonic plague claimed its victims less than 3 or 4 days after the symptoms appeared. The second type of plague was pneumonic plague. Pneumonic plague, like its name suggests, infected the lungs. Victims had fever and headache similar to the bubonic plague, but also chest pain, trouble breathing, cough and bloody sputum. Pneumonic plague also took less than 4 days to kill the victim. The third and the last type of plague was septicemic plague. This plague caused fever, diarrhea, headache, extreme weakness, but most impressively, black skin. In other words, gangrene. Septicemic plague killed faster than other two types, sometimes even before the symptoms appeared on the victim. Plague arrived in England at the summer of 1348. It traveled from the south to the whole country in less than a year and ravaged the country.
The plague didn't discriminate intentionally, but of course peasants were more vulnerable to it than the nobles. Nobles lived in stone houses rather than mud. They lived in separate from the animals. They had better care and means to escape to isolated sites if necessary. Only one member of the royal family, Edward III's daughter Princess Joan, died by the plague and she was in Gascony. The other nobles were not as lucky as the royal family, but still luckier than the commoners.
The fatality rate is not certain, but the most optimistic guess is 20% mortality, while the bolder claims go up to 50%. An estimate puts the number to 2 to 3 millions, roughly half of England at that time. Whatever this rate actually is, it was perceived far more deadly by the contemporaries. Most of the contemporary accounts, who were mostly clergy, wrote that only 1/5 of mankind remained.
People left alive were not enough to bury the dead. Complete chaos and anarchy conquered England. Wife abandoned husband, parents abandoned child, siblings abandoned siblings, friend abandoned friend. It was believed to be a great apocalypse, the end of time. Some people turned extremely isolationist, cut off every human contact and hoped for the best. Some others did the exact opposite. It was the end of the world and that meant they were free to do as they pleased. They lived as there was no tomorrow and in most cases there weren't. Drank, fornicated, sacked and plundered.
But the plague was not very resistant to winter. It survived 1348-49 winter, but not the next one. That finally retreated from England in 1350, though he was to visit again time to time. And after that 2 apocalyptic years, English got back on their feet remarkably quickly.
But things were different. Black Death changed England and the world forever. After that enormous mortality, an equally enormous shortage of labor occurred. There were not enough tenants to work the land. There was also a shortage of demand as so many died so quickly that the market could not catch up. This led to the rise of the laborers' wages and the decrease of rent and other prices. Peasants got hold of a power unlike any time ever before. They could go from lord to lord, manor to manor for the best wages, and the lords had to pay them what they wanted, as the other possibility was leaving the crops ungathered. This was so threatening to the feudal order, the King Edward immediately issued the Ordinance of Labourers in the wake of Black Death, setting wages to the pre-plague level and enforcing it on the pain of death.
But king could not compete with the market. The genie was out of bottle. The 14th century saw the empowerment of peasants. Their wages rise and prices fell. Property of the dead relatives were left to their life. Average living standards of a peasant increased dramatically. As the workers got more power, the serfdom gradually disappeared. This process led to the Great Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Even though the revolt was unsuccessful in the end, it marked the end of an era. Peasants, or more appropriately commoners, were now a major force in English politics. It is argued that this shift of power was so critical that it caused the upcoming democratization of England and eventually sparked up the Industrial Revolution, making England the greatest power of time.